Welcome back, Superman.
We miss Superman?
Yes, indeed.
Are you emotional putting back the suit?
It's, yes.
I have not managed to see it in a cinema yet. I figured of all times to go to a cinema, it would be dangerous to go now.
It's official, though. You're coming back as Superman, right?
I am.
Congratulations.
I mean, come on.
The journey to Man of Steel 2 is a story riddled with missed opportunities, shifting priorities, and conflicting visions at Warner Bros. From the early days following the release of Man of Steel in 2013, there was an expectation that it would spawn a trilogy of movies. However, this wasn't the case, as any sequel in the works would be derailed over the years. With the growing anticipation of James Gunn's new Superman film, let's take a look back at the previous era of DC, particularly Henry Cavill's rendition of Superman, and why a sequel never seemed to happen.
If Man of Steel 2 happens,
It will.
what I'd like to see, well, just a continuation of what we've been doing, which is a lot of questions asked, no obvious answers, and the evolution of the relationship between Kal-El and mankind.
Technically speaking, the first attempt at a Man of Steel 2 occurred around the periods of 2013 to 2014. After the release of the first Man of Steel movie, Warner Bros. Were actually expecting the film to gross $1 billion. However, after Man of Steel had a moderate box office run, they'd of course seek to create a sequel that would offer a higher incentive for people to watch it. This is why, although Snyder claims that he had always intended the next movie to be Batman v Superman, I think it's clear that Batman's inclusion was simply a way to fast-track a higher box office for this universe. The second attempt at a Man of Steel 2 came in 2016 when news would release that Warner Bros. Were fast-tracking a Man of Steel 2 and the project was a top priority to develop. We know this report has some validity, as Warner Bros. Themselves, during an investor conference in 2014, would make it clear that a Superman film was something they were actively developing. At around this time, we know that Zack Snyder himself was the one developing this project, as he'd say years later that him and Warner Bros. Were discussing ideas for the movie. One idea that came up was Brainiac serving as the main antagonist, as there was a belief that Superman should be challenged by otherworldly threats. Snyder, however, expressed interest in perhaps the Kryptonians that were trapped in the Phantom Zone returning. How exactly they would have played a part in the film is unknown. In 2017, we would hear reports that Matthew Vaughn was in talks with Warner Bros. About developing a Superman film, since this would coincide with the previous news. There's a chance Matthew Vaughn would have directed this film, while Zack Snyder would have served as a producer. These plans would never go anywhere, as by 2018, Cavill and director Christopher McQuarrie would pitch another Superman film to Warner Bros., one that was meant to tie into some kind of Green Lantern film. However, supposedly the studio execs weren't very interested in the project, and they'd never move on the idea. Strangely, in 2018, we'd receive news that Warner Bros. Was working on a Supergirl movie written by writer Oren Irenzel. Not much is known about this project, but did bring up an interesting point. Why was Warner Bros. Actively developing a Supergirl project, yet they seem to have a strange refusal to make another Superman movie? Man of Steel 2 would effectively remain on ice for another 4 years. However, by 2022, fans received a surprise they did not see coming.
It's been a while since anyone's made the world this nervous. Black Adam. We should talk.
Superman, to the shock of many, appeared in the ending of Black Adam, setting up a Black Adam vs. Superman project. Supposedly, Dwayne "Rock" Johnson had been working for years to bring Henry back into the role, and oh boy, were fans excited to see him return, and Cavill himself also seemed emotional and proud about his return to the role.
I wanted to make it official that I am back as Superman. There's a lot to be thankful for, and I'll get to that in time, but I wanted to thank you guys most of all. Thank you for your support, and thank you for your patience.
Soon after this announcement, we'd receive news that Warner Brothers were actively developing Man of Steel 2 and were currently looking for a writer. Writer Stephen Knight would quickly take helm on writing the film, and according to what we know, this Man of Steel sequel would have focused on Brainiac as the main antagonist. Number 1. The fast-tracking of a universe. By the time Man of Steel had released, the MCU was full steam ahead and developing their cinematic universe, so WB was keen on developing their own as well. According to David S. Goyer, WB was desperate to catch up to what Marvel was doing, so there was an immense pressure to pump out as many projects as possible and catch up quickly. In fact, there was a point where the person running WB pitched 20 different DC movies that would be released over the course of the next 10 years, despite the fact that there wasn't a script for any one of them. Anyways, with this fast-tracking of their cinematic universe, there was simply no time to develop solo movies for many of the heroes. That's why they jumped from Man of Steel to Batman v Superman, and why solo projects were being delayed constantly. Number 2. Lack of faith in the Superman brand. Yeah, it's unclear why, but Warner Brothers seem to have lost complete faith in Superman as a viable franchise. They were developing a Superman film for a few years after Man of Steel released, but by 2018, they lost interest in the property. In fact, instead of developing a Superman movie, they were developing a Supergirl film instead. It's almost as if they were trying to phase out Superman entirely. There are 3 explanations for this strange rejection. 1. When Justice League failed in theaters, Warner Brothers shifted focus on their DC films, prioritizing lower budget movies and proven IPs over established franchises that cost a lot of money to produce. 2. President of DC Film Walter Hamada purposely kept Superman from having another movie, as supposedly he had planned for him to return in some kind of Crisis on Infinite Earths film, which does imply that they thought Superman was a character that could only work in event films. And finally, number 3, perhaps Henry Cavill had a bad relationship with Warner Brothers execs behind the scenes, leading them to reject having him appear in any capacity. In fact, supposedly WB executives like Toby Emmerich began trying to recast Superman around 2018, which may indicate that there was some dislike towards Cavill in the role.
Think about it, Jake. I could see things so clearly on how that scene looks like, what that scene looks like, what the film looks like, what the next 3 films look like. Now, whether or not that comes to fruition, that always helps when you have that kind of clarity.
The final factor has more to do with unfortunate timing than anything. You see, when David Zaslav became the new head of Warner Brothers, Dwayne Johnson took the opportunity to pitch a DC plan to Zaslav. He had a vision for a DC universe, one that would revolve around Black Adam and Superman. This plan involved the development of Black Adam and Superman sequels, with spin-off films being developed of others as well. Eventually, these films would all culminate in some kind of Black Adam v Superman movie. So yeah, generally The Rock had a seemingly concrete direction to take the DC universe, spearheaded by him and his production company. It's safe to say that he was making a gamble by this point, as although Cavill was in Black Adam and a script for Man of Steel 2 was in development, Cavill hadn't actually signed a contract to return for more movies. The Rock was genuinely just hoping that David Zaslav would resonate with his vision for the DC universe and leave him in charge on building the DC's cinematic universe, with Black Adam and Superman as the core pillars. Unfortunately, The Rock's plans for a DC universe had an opposing faction. Peter Safran and James Gunn both came in with their very own direction for the DC universe, one that would serve as a soft reboot of the verse, with a new Superman reboot to kick off the universe. Due to this, Henry Cavill would once again be let go from the role, as James Gunn had a vision of a younger Superman. It's unfortunate that Henry Cavill was a part of a studio system that would much rather play catch-up than take their time. A studio with shifting executives that made it nearly impossible to have a concrete vision. A studio who had little to no faith in the potential of Superman and what they could bring to the big screen.